Hello, everybody. Anna Sabramowitz here. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I have a very special guest, personal hero of mine, and he doesn't know this, but definitely a personal mentor who has influenced the way I design courses and also interact with the instructors that I work with. Basically, they get force-fed a lot of a lot of his work. So let me give you a quick overview, and if I miss anything, please correct me. All right, so this is LD Fink, goes by D, I believe. And D has served for 26 years as the founding director of the Instructional Development Program at the University of Oklahoma, and also as president of the POD Network in Higher Education in 2004, from 2004 to 2005. So the POD Network is the primary professional association for faculty developers in the United States, and it is also the largest in the world. Now, during the last 10 years, he has consulted with over 200 colleges and universities in the US and 16 other countries in South America, Europe. Sorry?
Up to 20 now.
Oh, really? Oh.
And I'm headed off to Kenya in 2 weeks.
Woo! Oh, man, I hope you don't have to take, oh, you probably will have to take malaria.
I've had malaria. I did, but because I'm higher elevation, but they did say get hepatitis A or C or whichever it was.
That's
so I got that a couple of days ago. Yep. It's not bad.
Those
I'm
are
for everything else.
Yeah. So basically, the man's consulted all over the world, which is fantastic. And also, one of the things is he's published an amazing book, one that is my go-to. It's called Creating Significant Learning Experiences, and it is a fantastic guide on how to design courses for higher education. So, yes, there it is. That is a beautiful new cover. I still have the old school blue one, so
yep.
That's
They're
fabulous.
Both good. Basic ideas are identical. Yeah.
So fabulous. Thank you so much for joining me. Okay, so first let's talk about the origin story. Kind of like, let's get into it. How did you get into this profession? What still drives you? Why are you still traveling to these places and taking malaria, hepatitis pills?
Hepatitis shots, etc. Yeah. Well, it's a little odd story, so it's interesting that you ask. Starting with, when I went to school as an undergraduate, I had no interest in being a teacher. I took no education classes. My major was a social science major. But right in the last year of my undergraduate years, that was 1962, President Kennedy started the Peace Corps program. I was attracted to that. I'd always been interested in things international, and I signed up for that, or at least I applied for it. They accepted me and asked me to go to the country of Iran for 2 years, 62 to 64, to be a teacher. Well, no, let me back off of that. To go to a school. Our whole project was working in agricultural high schools, and I got picked in part because I grew up on a farm, so I had an agricultural background. But when I was in training for the Peace Corps, they had a bunch of different groups for different kind of things. I was in the animal husbandry group. They had a separate group that I was not in for teaching English as a second language, what they knew some of the people do. However, when we got to Iran and they signed people to schools, I ended up going to one where they needed somebody to teach English as a second language. I did that. I had no training for that whatsoever. Those people did. I did not. I was floating. I was winging it, basically. I mean, literally winging it. So I was trying to figure out, how do you teach people English as a second language with almost essentially no help at all. So I was on my own. Did that for 2 years. Had a chance to travel around for a year afterwards and do some other things. And then I came back and I got a job. This was in the mid-'60s. Vietnam was building up the United States. I got drafted, in fact, but I wanted to keep the draft off my back. One way you could do that was teach school. So I got into teaching school. If I took a couple summer courses in education, which I did, got in there, taught English, math, junior high. I could handle that halfway. But they had a geography course. Now I traveled around the world. I'd been overseas for 3 years. I really thought it'd be fun to teach that. Had no training, first of all, I'm not teaching, but I had no training in how to teach geography. Again, I was winging it. I knew I couldn't use a textbook. I'd get bored after 3 weeks, as would the students. I had a gazillion slides which I could show, which would be interesting for about the first 2 or 3 times. But after that, when I flipped out the lights, they would, I would flip them out. Okay. So I had to do something creative. And then at the end of that year, I saw a poster in the school for I think it was a 6-week institute in Western Illinois. I was teaching in Illinois where I grew up for teachers, K-12 teachers of geography. So they were focused on subject matter K-12. I said, whew, wouldn't it be nice to know what you were doing? Okay. So I signed up for it, got into it, and half of it was about teaching us geography, which was great. But the other half was how to teach geography. So finally, I'm getting halfway close. And it was in that institute that somebody put out the idea that one way to put together a course is to, first of all, figure out what you want them to learn by the end of the course. And then part two, ask yourself, what would they have to do to learn that? And I said, man, what a powerful idea. and I was all excited to go back to my school and try that out. But I got disrupted because in the middle of the institute, I got drafted again, couldn't get out of it, had to go in the military.
Oh, wow.
I spent 4 years in the Navy. But then when I came out, now I had the military behind me, had my traveling around behind me for a little bit. I could figure out what I wanted to do. I went through some hard choices, but finally figured out to go back and pick up that teaching of geography, which I really got excited about. Went to grad school and worked with a guy who had a joint appointment at the University of Chicago, a joint appointment in geography and education. So he was just ideal for me. And we worked together. And then one of the things, but that was, I was thinking K-12 teaching of geography. But while I was in grad school, a couple things happened that started to shift to higher education. And then my advisor got selected by an NSF grant to the group of geographers to prepare graduate students for college teaching. He was the director of it. And I was his only grad student in that kind of working with geography and education. So I became his right-hand man. So we spent 2 to 3 years working with directors of various programs in graduate schools around the US on the question, how do you prepare somebody for college teaching, specifically in geography, but mainly it was about college teaching. That's what really linked, took me further into good teaching, but also got me into the question of faculty development. How do you help somebody become a good or better teacher? Got familiar with some of the literature, some of the ideas, what program activities might be, et cetera. And so that was really into teaching, and then the teaching geography, then into higher education and faculty development was kind of the sequence there. Didn't start out that way, but once I got into it, and especially once I started the program at Oklahoma, I just knew this is where I belong. I mean, it felt something I had a passion for. I felt I had some skills and knowledge about it, needed to develop them all the way through, but it just really felt right. And when you ask about, so what keeps me going all these years, that's a valid question. I think it's because I have seen in my own teaching, but also seen with others, there really are things you can learn, any teacher can learn, that can make them better. Everybody's learned some of this along the way, but there are always additional things you can learn. And I've seen for myself, when I learn these ideas and learn how to apply them properly and effectively in my own teaching, it increases student attendance, it increases student engagement, it increases the quantity and quality of student learning. And those are things that I've also learned I care about. And if I can learn some things that will help me with that, that's what I want to do. And that's kind of what I want to help other people do. For those who care enough about their own teaching, they want to make it better. And so that's literally what keeps me going.
Do you perceive that there's been, I mean, you travel to so many places. Are you still feeling there's a big gap, or do you think that there's been a shift because of internet?
Well, both are true. There is a big, the internet is changing the name of the game somewhat, but I would say it's still true that there's a big gap between current practice and what we could be doing face-to-face or online, either way. There is, I can sense the beginning of a movement towards, we got to figure out how to do this better globally. And the U.S. isn't quickly leading that, but it is happening. We're in it. The only thing we're doing halfway there is we do have probably, well, no, not even that. I can say a high percentage of universities with faculty development programs. We do have we're kind of in the middle on that. We're better than the undeveloped countries, but places like the British Empire, which is England, but India, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, those kind of places have moved one step further, which is requiring of beginning teachers, either you got to have so many hours of learning about teaching before you can promote it to the next level, or something like that, or they've had universal faculty development programs like England. More or less all universities have a faculty development program. In the U.S., we probably got 40-50% by now, somewhere in that area. So it's still a good percentage, but still not the majority, like some other countries. So U.S. is kind of in the middle of this. But the other thing that we're learning is, that whole shift to a learning-centered teaching as opposed to teaching-centered, that paradigm shift article. That's starting to gain traction, and which is why I'm getting invitations to go to other countries. They know there's something afoot. They know they need something better. What they don't know is what the ideas are that will help them get there, and that's why they're inviting me and other people like me that can share some ideas with them. So they're starting the movement as well.
So this might be a little bit of a shift, maybe getting down into the more than the gritty of what I found in your book and just in your approach is that you have a very unique approach when it comes to identifying who the learner is. So this idea of the learner-centered approach, right? And how a course needs to be structured to help them learn. So can you tell us more about this approach and why?
Well, it's interesting. When I was back that grad student, and I ended up being grad student, work on the teaching of geography in higher education. What I ended up doing was sitting in on 3 college courses of geography at one university that had field experiences a lot, which is something I was trying to get closer with. But the heart of that study was interviews with roughly 100 students about what they remembered from the course and what they thought they got out of it that was really significant. I didn't quite have that phrase yet, but I did know it was something. I said, what did you get out of it that you remembered and really affected how you live your life? I did have that question as a grad student working that dissertation. And each of these interviews was about an hour long. And I found I really enjoyed hearing these students tell their story and finding out what their answers to those questions were. And I guess let me clarify how I did that. I had a 2-part question. Did you ever have any of your courses in college or in geography that you learned something that was so valuable it changed the way you lived your life? And most of them said, not very many. But they said, oh, there were a few. Well, I said, well, pick one that did. What was it you learned in that course that had the power to actually change the way you lived your life? Personal life, work life, social life, civic life, or whatever. And then they tell me. And so I wrote that down. And the most valuable thing in that whole study, in my view, was the beginnings of that taxonomy. Because probably about 2/3, 3/4 of the taxonomy significant learning, if you go back to that study, was in there. But that study was called, I labeled my dissertation, Listening to the Learner. So that's something I've been on to for quite a while. So 1, I enjoyed it, but 2, I think that's something we've got to do as teachers. And here's the reason why. I was thinking about that after looking at your question. It says all teachers have 2 questions they've got to answer if they want to be effective. 1, they've got to understand their learners, what's going on with them, what makes it challenging for them to learn this material, either something about them or this material in relation to them. And then 2nd, once they get a clue on that, they have to learn how to help them overcome whatever those challenges are and learn it successfully. Well, to do that, you've just got to learn some things about your learners and how they're responding to material, how they're responding to the way you're teaching of it. And that led to one of the things that I thought really helped me a lot as a teacher. This is about halfway through my teaching here at Oklahoma. And I finally developed what I called a questionnaire. Well, I developed a questionnaire to give at the end of a course to students. And I called it focused feedback. It wasn't like the usual standard questionnaires for students. Was this a good course? Do you like it or not? You want that information. But this focus feedback had 2 parts, and I had another version that had 3 parts. But the 2-part version, just to explain it simply, was first part was, here were the things that I had hoped you would learn in this course. That was from straight out of the syllabus, my learning goals. And I said, please give me a rating and a set of comments. How well, each one of these, one by one, how well did that happen for you? And I'm not asking for you to say this course was, magic and wonderful in every aspect. If it happened, I want to know that. If it didn't happen, I want to know that, high, medium, or low. And then why? What helped it happen? What didn't happen? So give me that for all the goals. And then the second part was the learning activities. I did briefly describe each learning. I had readings, we had maybe some mini lectures, we had some small group discussions, we had whole class discussions, whatever we had some independent projects. Each one of these, the purpose of that activity was to help you do this, that, or whatever. Question, to what degree was that effective for you? Okay, and so I got their answers. And when I took that and then kind of summarized the answers, there's always a range. So for any given thing, some things were effective or not effective. But I had a high resolution picture of which of the learning goals were happening for most of the students and which weren't. And some clue as to why. They were telling me why they weren't. And the same thing for the activity, what was working and what wasn't. And that allowed me to know what to keep on, what was working, keep it, and what needed some tinkering, some changing, minor changing or big changes or whatever. But that focus, that information that allowed me to do that came from, if you will, listening to the learner, in this case via a questionnaire about a specific course. So I think doing things like that continues to, that's what you got to do to be effective and to get more effective, is you've got to find out from students, is this working or not? You can do it quicker, you can do it at the end of the course, but we've got to make the learning work for the learners we have. And to do that, we've got to listen to them.
I really like that approach. I think that there's this aspect of it which kind of asks you to let go of your ego a little bit, right? Because it's hard to get that feedback. How do you how do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I think that's only hard to give that up if you think the course is all about me. There are teachers who feel that way.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a lot of knowledge, and I've worked hard to get it. And my job is to share my knowledge with you. So it's from me, about me, etc. Okay? And if that's your attitude, yeah, it's going to be hard to give that up. But if you buy that teaching to learning paradigm shift, that it really, I'm an element, I'm an important factor in this whole thing. But the bottom line is not about what they think about me or what they think I'm the most erudite, knowledgeable person they've ever met, at least on this subject or whatever. That's not what it's all about. It's all about their learning by the end of the course. And if we can make that shift, then I need to do whatever I can do to get that to happen as well as it possibly can. So if you ever, I didn't start out with, where I didn't have a clue. I knew I didn't know what I was doing back at the Peace Corps that first time I was teaching before I had any training about what I was doing. I knew I wasn't great. I knew it wasn't about me, but I knew I wanted good things to happen for them. And so I got started that way. So when I read that paradigm shift, it helped me clarify something, but it was more of an affirmation of something I sort of intuitively felt. But if you realize it's all about the learning, then that's not a hard shift to make.
I think that's maybe a little more difficult when you come to like when you start with faculty that came in as experts versus coming in as teachers, like they do in K-12, right? It's a different.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I get that.
Here's the counter argument for that. Even when faculty do have pride, and oftentimes justifiable, there were a lot of great, very knowledgeable people here at Oklahoma who taught from that base and everywhere I've gone. But even so, even those teachers don't like to go to their classes and see only half the students there, if that. Or of the students there, half of them not paying attention, or they're just not interested or engaged. Or to get to the end of the course or things along the way and see students doing really poor work, indicating they really have not learned. That's not an enjoyable experience for anyone, okay? And I've seen that happen for very knowledgeable people, okay? So my selling point is, even if they've got a big ego, would you be interested if I could share some ideas with you that would increase student attendance, increase student engagement, increase the quality and quantity of student learning? If I can tell you based on my own experience as a teacher and lots of other people, I think we can increase those and improve those for your courses. Would you be interested? Would you give me a little of your time? And most people will find it hard to say no to that, okay? If they're having trouble in that area, yeah. So that's the roundabout on that, I think.
So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what active learning actually means. I think when we talk about active learning, some people are just like, somebody's just interested, but it's
Yeah.
not just that. What can you go more deeply into that?
Yes, yes. I think that was a common misreading of what active learning was for when it first got started, in part because the people who wrote those books, the subtitle after active learning was how to increase student engagement. Well, it does, okay? But student engagement is not the same thing as the student learning. It's an essential means to the learning, but it's not the learning itself. You still have to get to that second step. So it's a gotta have, but the purpose of it is not just to make things exciting. So how do you plug it in a way that really promotes the learning as well as the student engagement? If you do it right, it will increase engagement, and to do that right, it'll increase the student learning. But when you suggested we might want to talk about the meaning of active learning, what we do with that, people often joke about Fink in my book and my ideas, that I know I've really got a good idea when I can illustrate it with 3 circles in a triangle. And from
I
the
think that's
from the course
genius.
design to a whole bunch of other things.
I think it's great. I think most people just
I
when
like it
it's
because it
great.
creates all kinds of good things. Yeah,
I got to tell
but
you, I think to me, an expert is somebody who can present things very, very simply. And to me, the fact that I can look at that and remember all those elements,
yeah, the 3 I can remember. Yeah,
yes.
14 I can't. Yeah. Well, and same thing with active learning. When I said, okay, what is it we're really talking about? Well, and again, I thought there was some understandable misperception. Everybody said we got to stop lecturing, or if you translate in the teacher talking, not true. I said, but or reading, all this reading of books and stuff. And they said, but wait a minute. I said to myself, wait a minute. I like to listen to a good lecture. I like to read a good book. Why? And then the obvious answer was, it's because when it's good, I get good information or good ideas from it. Well, that's a gotta have for any kind of valuable new learning. So let's keep that, but then say, we're not going to throw that out, the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but we got to add some other to it. The real argument was we got to stop doing what we were doing before those books came out in the early 90s, which is lecture, 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 and that was really all we were doing. That was the real argument. So what we got to do is just translate lecture into get information ideas and some way for students to do something with that information is, and for some way for them to reflect both about the ideas and about their learning. And so if you want to promote active learning, I think there's 3 things you want to do. First thing is figure out some way to get that acquisition, that initial exposure and acquisition of the information and ideas as much as you can outside of class. Because that's just when we have to have a classroom and we pull all the students same time, same place, the teachers same time, same place. We want to do that, but that's expensive. Don't use that moment to do something that can be done so much simpler, such as read chapter 1 and 2 or whatever. Okay. So let's get as much as we can, move that out of the classroom, then have them come in and check their understanding and then move on to other things. And the second thing you want to do with them is have them do something with that information. Check their understanding of it, which is what we do with those scratch-off cards that you talked about earlier. We can go into that if we want, but do something with it. Answer questions, solve problems, whatever. And the clicker thing that Eric Mazur from Harvard has done so much with. Have them read it outside of class, come in, give them some little questions, some basic questions, not little, but basic questions. Have them click whether they think this answer is correct or that answer is correct. Analyze, here's a problem, can you answer it correctly? Turn to the neighbor and then answer it, see if you change your answer and all that stuff. And that simple little dialogue often helps people understand it. Oh, I didn't think about that. Let me change my answer on that. But they're doing something with it. They're not just listening to somebody, which is information intake. They're doing something. Can I use that to answer this question? And so you want to have them do something. Then the third thing I think we really need to do is have them reflect, not just on do I understand it, but reflect on their learning. What, as a result of my learning experiences, what am I learning about myself as a learner, about the nature of learning, about what it takes for me to learn effectively, all those kind of things. And that involves minute papers where you can do that sort of thing, and learning journals and learning portfolios where they sort of step back from themselves and look at themselves learning and say, where's it going well, where's it not going well, and what does that tell me about learning myself, and so forth, so forth. So, as much as we can, move the information and idea stuff acquisition outside of class. Use your class time, and even assignments, you can have students go out of class, but have them do something with it, then have them reflect it. You get all three of those, you've got a good version of active learning.
This is one of the things I noticed when students join class is that they still have very outdated methods of studying. They have outdated methods of, they don't understand themselves as in terms of learning. So how do you facilitate that in the class? Like, well, let's say you're talking to somebody and they're already in third year of university, and if it's been all brute force.
It's been information input, and
they hate reading by the time they leave.
Well, see, a couple things there. I think when you do use learning-centered ways of teaching, or in course design, as well as the interaction stuff and all these new ideas on teaching, one real important principle or rule is, if you're going to do something that students are not used to doing, so they had 3 years of lecture, not stop lecture, whatever, you're going to do active learning, whatever, you've got to introduce them to that and help them understand why you're doing it and what that means for them in terms of what they need to do to learn effectively in this kind of a class. So you need to spend the first class day or part of the first week ever letting them do it as well, and seeing, just so they can feel what small groups feels like, what reflection feels like, what talking to other students in class feels like, etc. Maybe asking questions more frequently of the teacher in class. Let them feel what it's like when they do that. But you also got to give them some information about why you're doing this, that they can understand. But basically, it's going to be about make it more interesting, make it more valuable in terms of preparing you for life and one part of life, this, that, or whatever. So you want to justify it for them. The other thing you may need to do is, the second thing, I guess, you'll do this reflection, have them step back and say, well, how's it going? What's helping me? What's not helping me learn? Those kind of things, so where they can start to gather information for that. There's a third option that another person has started to develop that I think is potentially very significant and very valuable. And it's a lady named Sandra McGuire, a chemistry teacher down at Louisiana State University. And she taught the intro chemistry class, large lecture class kind of thing. And she had a lot of first generation students who did not know how to study right for college. And although in this case, we're probably dealing with freshmen and sophomores. And a lot of those students had the slightly below the surface, or maybe fully at the surface, concern that maybe I'm not college level material. Okay. And they get to the first test or two, and they get data that suggest, no, you're not college level material because you're getting D's and F's. Okay. Those students are on the verge of flunking that class and dropping out of college. She was horrified at what that meant, when she believed these students could learn if they properly understood what learning was all about. And her belief was that most students, we got two problems here. Teachers who come in thinking their job is to lecture, and we got to try to change that. The other problem is students coming in thinking, I got to memorize everything I read, or not make sense of it, but memorize it all. If they were smart enough and had a halfway decent short-term memory, they could get by with that in high school. It doesn't work with college courses generally. And so we have to help them recognize quickly, before they do flunk out of every course they're doing, that won't work here, and there's a better alternative, and that they're capable of learning. So she told students after 1 or 2 tests where they got some negative feedback, I'm going to offer a 1-hour session on how to learn in this course. But it's really about how to learn in any course. It's just about learning. And she gives them a couple of exercises that proves to them that their intelligence, as they conceive of it, is not fixed. I'm smart enough for college, or I'm not smart enough for college. It's fluid. If you do things right, you can increase your ability to answer questions, solve problems. And it's a fantastic exercise. I've borrowed it from her and used it when I'm working with faculty groups. And I tell them at the beginning of this, how many of you believe I can raise your intelligence by a factor of 2 or 3 in the next 3 minutes? Of course, nobody believes that. I'm smart already. I'm not going to double that. But I go through the exercise, give them a problem, and they do very poorly. I explain a few things, and I give them the same problem, and they do 3 times better. I say, there you see, I did it. Well, that's, I could go through that with you, but it's a really interesting exercise. But you might want to talk to her on her and have her, sort of explain to that what she's now resigned. She's retired from the LSU, does consulting. She's got a book out called Teach Students How to Learn.
Fabulous.
It's really good. I think it's really powerful. I learned about it after I finished teaching at Oklahoma, or else I would have incorporated. I think it's that powerful, really good.
So
how does she do that?
Well, no, I can't ask her, but this is the thing that I'm thinking about is, do you said you are now in your workshops, you're talking to people who are designing the courses, who are, but you're teaching them that this is possible. You're almost like, it's their self-belief that learning is fluid. That's
a good point you make. One of my big goal in my workshops is to convince, in this case, professors who might think, I don't see any way to make my courses a whole lot better. I'm tinkering with it as there is, and I think I'm making a little adjustments and getting a little bit better, which is true. But I'm laying out the claim for them. If you learn this idea and a couple of the other ideas I'm going to throw in here, you can make it a whole lot better, not just a little bit better. Well, I've got to convince them of that. And part of the way I do that is in the workshop, the content is course design, but I'm using all these different things, especially the teaching strategy of team-based learning and the outer course before we start reading assignment, which we check their understanding and then have them do things with in class, like I've been talking about here, and periodically reflecting on what they're doing and how it's working and why is that a little bit better or a lot better kind of thing. So and then we get to the end of it, and then we stand back and look at that. And I said, well, if you can do this, do you think that's going to make a big difference, little difference? And they can say, wow, this workshop, there was energy, there was engagement. We really felt like we learned a lot. If I can make my course like that, I think it would make a big difference, not a little difference. So what I'm doing is modeling the message that I'm trying to convey with the hope that it will not convince them / help them believe that they can really make changes that will make a big difference. Yeah.
It's so you practice what you preach. I love it. But there's another aspect to that. And I think that a lot of people have, when they get to expert level, they don't, they stop being learners, or it's been a long time since they've been there. And so
they forget what it's like to be a student.
Yeah. Afraid, new, and also engaged, right? Yeah.
I've read so many stories of senior people, provost, especially deans, provost, sometimes president, who when they get a sabbatical will spend it taking courses for the express purpose of reminding them what it feels like to be a student with a subject they don't know about. I mean, so they specifically get something like Greek or mathematics or whatever they just never had time to go do. And it's every time they do that, it is truly revolutionary for them. They just realize how hard it is when the teacher doesn't lay out their objectives clearly, what doesn't give them feedback on their assignments, either good feedback or prompt feedback or meaningful feedback and those kind of things. All these things that many of us do without realizing what the problems are with that. But they discover it because now they're advanced learners. They know what they want, but now they're seeing what does. And hey, all these things, these teachers I'm taking, I do those same things. And now I see the consequence of that. And so it really changes their teaching. So maybe we want to just everybody after about 3 or 4 years, take a little time off and take one class and take notes as what's it like to be a learner in a class where you really don't know the subject beforehand.
I do like that very much. I think that would actually be very valuable.
That'd be a good faculty development activity right there.
Like, why not?
Maybe I need to start suggesting that when I have a chance to talk to universities around like that. I hadn't laid that out as a separate activity, but I think you're right. That could be good.
So I've attended 2 of the workshops that you run. So when you're running these workshops, tell us about one that you run, and what do you think these are things that most people struggle with when they're in a workshop?
I'd probably put my finger on two things that's really challenging for people to get their heads wrapped around, and well, not only their heads, but buy into right off the bat. The thing that's a little challenge, that from teaching to learning, that whole learning paradigm shift. Most people are still operating, even though that article's been out now 25 years or more. They're still operating with a teaching paradigm. You know, the word hasn't gone out to the faculty level that we need to think about what we're doing. And so I often lay that out at the beginning, and I lay out what I hope is a semi-persuasive way, but it still takes time for them to adjust their activities to reflect what that would mean if you operate as a teacher on a learning-centered paradigm. So that's one thing that's a challenge. The other is the taxonomy, I think. It's not hard to get their head wrapped around, but when they say the right-hand side of my taxonomy, you know, the part that's Bloom repackaged, the foundational knowledge application integration, they've been doing that and living with that, you know, as a student and as a teacher for some time. So the idea of what they might need to do to promote it and might need to do to assess it, they've got half an idea. But the left-hand side, the human dimension, the caring, the learning how to learn, how would we get that to happen? And even more challenging, how would I ever assess it? I mean, and I literally get that direct question almost every workshop when we start getting to that part of it.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I have to spend some time suggesting examples, and also, you know, part of the answer to that is remember, we're talking feedback, not necessarily grading.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you will want to grade all the right-hand side at some point. You may well want to you may want to grade how well you interact with others if that's part of your grading system, like with small groups, and how well are you learning how to work in small groups. That may be part of your grade, may not be. Caring, almost for sure you don't want to use that as part of the grading system. You assess it, get feedback on how it's happening, but that doesn't mean grading the students on it. And the learning how to learn, you can grade that, or you may just want to give feedback on it. But once you decide, yeah, go ahead.
So you have the dimensions, and there's 6?
6, yeah. Mm-hmm. 3 on, I call them 3 on the right in the electron version of it. Yeah, yeah.
So if you want to just kind of go through
sure,
off the top of your head, and then the ones that you find difficult
sure.
to assess.
Yeah, let me just real quickly give you people a review of the taxonomy of significant learning, and I want to preface this by saying by drawing a compare and contrast with the Bloom taxonomy. And one of the exciting experiences I had when I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago in the early 1970s was Benjamin Bloom was there and was still teaching, and I got to take a course from Benjamin Bloom.
That's so cool, claim to fame.
It really was. I mean, he is one of the giants of education.
Oh yeah.
With multiple ideas, of which the educational objectives was one of several, but that maybe was the biggest. But here's the difference between, and what I feel I'm doing is standing on Bloom's shoulders, borrowing the whole idea of the taxonomy, but by standing on his shoulders, trying to look a little further and seeing some kinds of learning that he didn't come up with. And the reason what I came up with in him is how we came about it. What Bloom did, it's actually Bloom and his associates, was interviewed college teachers, and in essence asked them, what is it you really want your students to learn? And they got this long list of many things, and several of them were similar, so they kind of grouped those together, different words, but they were referring really to the same thing. And what they came up with is 6 kinds of cognitive knowledge. That's the one we all are familiar with, that he was really directly responsible for. And so they did that. I took I took a real different approach. Instead of talking to professors, I talked to students. Ask them that part of the thing I did a while ago. Have you ever had a course where you learned something that really changed the way you lived your life? That's what I mean by significant learning. Not just something you memorize for the test and then forget. Second, what is it that has the power? What kinds of learning have the power to change the way people live their life? Well, I started that with my dissertation, and probably 100 students got that started, and then continued talking to students about that. And then when I was working with some graduate students one time in a course in I think it was 98, 97, somewhere in there at Oklahoma, I was trying to figure out these were students from different disciplines, but they had them designing a course, and what kind of learning goals would they all say, yeah, I want to include that regardless of my discipline. Well, knowledge was one, application was one, everybody wants them to know something and learn how to use it. And then I hit on this, but everybody wants their students to learn, keep on learning after the course is over, because we can't teach them everything. There's just no way it's possible. So that would be good if we could do it, if we could figure out how to do it. And I knew right away that was a universal. And then I said, well, what else is universal? Then part of it came from, started coming up for my dissertation and some other things I had thought about. And eventually what I came up with these 6 categories where students had said, when I learned some of that, sometimes that had the effect of changing the way I live some part of my life, my personal things I'm interested in, things, the way I see the world, with the way I do things, whatever. The first category was the foundational knowledge, just concepts, information, principles, whatever, that you use to start your understanding of the world. But here we're just talking about understanding it and remembering it after you've read it or heard about it. So I'm really kind of combining two of Bloom's categories there. The second big category for me was when students said it was valuable to me because I learned how to do something I couldn't do before. And I could either I learned or I immediately saw the value of it. Well, and then I broke that down, think of some other ideas. So practical knowledge, practical thinking, critical thinking, application, integrative thinking, and creative thinking, things like that. So that's where I took a couple of Bloom's category and just called it big category application, but with several meanings to that. The third category was sometimes students said, well, it wasn't just what I learned about the subject matter of that course. It was how the teacher helped us learn how to take the subject matter of that course and link it and see the influence of other kinds of knowledge on that, or the influence of that knowledge on other kinds of knowledge. It's kind of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, some of those kind of things. And of course, that starts to be really up the potential significance of any kind of knowledge we get. So that's cognitive, that's like Bloom, that's like his synthesis, putting things together. So all those first 3 are just things Bloom referred to, but this time they came out of the mouths of students as being really valuable when they learned some of these things. But then we move to what this more than just cognitive kind of category. A lot of the second one the fourth category I called the human dimension, with 2 major subparts. A lot of the students said a particular course was really valuable to me because I learned something new about myself, who I am, my self-image, or who I want to be, my self-ideal. I think I'd like to be a person who does this or that or whatever. Or I learned something about myself as a learner, how I learn well. Or if they'd be in my course, that would be one of the things I'd be working on. Okay, so that was one major part, and I called that learning about yourself. But related to that was when they said the course was valuable because I learned how to interact with people, other people, especially people from different myself. But that could be a lot of different meanings, like learning how to work on a team, learning how to be a leader for a group, learning how to work with people who are very different from myself, older, younger, racially different, religious differences, rich, poor, nationalities, whatever. Okay, all of those, learning how to understand and interact effectively with people other than yourself. Of course, it's valuable once you start identifying. Well, those 2 were closely connected. You almost couldn't learn about one without having an impact on what learning about others, you learn about yourself, you learn about yourself, you begin to learn about interacting with others. So I linked those together and called that the human dimension. 5th category was when students said the course was valuable because it got me interested in something I'd never been interested in before. Now I'm excited. I want to go out and look at the astronomy, look at the stars at night or whatever. I want to read ancient history, or I get excited about math, they might say, kind of thing. I'm never excited about math, but now I can see I can solve problems, and when you solve problems, it's fun, or whatever. Or sometimes they say they've made students reevaluate some of their existing values about, say, cultural diversity, about environmental quality, some of those kind of things that we have controversies about in society. They may have one value, but the course made me rethink that. Well, look, that's what basically a value is, something you care about. So to me, that belongs in there. But also another important part of that is professionalism. If we're in professional schools and we're trying to give people up, we want them to value professional work. Well, valuing it means you care about certain things. I mean, heart, ethics, and responsibility is caring about something. And then finally, like I was mentioning a moment ago, nobody has ever taught everything that there is to know about any subject. So we got to stop trying that, stop talking so fast or signing all the chapter in the book or whatever we do to try to do that, get as close as we can. That's bad. So don't try to do it. Figure out what the fundamentals are, teach the fundamentals well, but then have an important segment of the course where you address the question of what they could do to keep on learning about this. And one of the things that I have developed for that is helping students develop, actually in the course, developing a plan for their own future learning about this course. Well, a plan means an agenda and a strategy for learning what's on the agenda. So if you can help students develop a list of some things they would like to or feel they need to learn about, and then secondly, develop a specific strategy. Does that mean take some courses, to read some books, go to just visit some websites, visit some people, whatever to each of those. If they can get a strategy, an agenda and a strategy, they've got a plan. Well, that would greatly, if you can help them do that, they walk out of there with a plan that they have built themselves. That's going to increase both the likelihood that they'll try to do it and they'll be able to successfully do it. Okay, so that learning how to learn, and I hate to say it, but I don't hate to say it, but I mean I like to say it. In the 21st century, if there's anything that we know is important, is that everybody really needs to learn things continually their whole life, not just while they're in college. And we're not automatically skilled at that. That's not something you're born with. You have to learn how to do it and get better at it. And I don't think even college students are really skilled at learning how to do independent learning on their own. So I think if they had a lot of courses that helped them learn how to do that, they would exit college with a plan, but also more skills as an independent learner, know how to engage in these things. And that's, for the 21st century, you're not going to be successful unless you learn how to keep on learning and figure out what you need to learn about, professionally, personally, whatever. And so that, to me, that if I had to pick one that for our time in history is critically important, it's always been important, but for it to be critically important for the individual and for society, we need people who know how to learn. So let's help them with that. I get off my bandstand now, but but that's not in Bloom. That's not in Bloom.
It's not.
And it's so important. So that's why that left-hand side, I mean, all those things on the left-hand side, people so often say to me, I just always sort of felt that's valuable, but I never thought it was legitimate to include it as an explicit goal in a course learning goal. And what this taxonomy in my book has done is, essence, give people permission to do that. Of course, then they have the question, well, how do we get that to happen? But that's what the model of integrated course design tries to help them do. And some of the examples in there helps them do. But so yeah, I think it's a fuller set of valuable kinds of learning than we had in Bloom's taxonomy. That, of course, I'm biased because I'm the creator of it, but I really think that's what a lot of people have found valuable about the book, and they've tracked it. That they like that taxonomy and where it allows them to go further than what Bloom did. Everything Bloom did was valuable, but there's some additional things that are also valuable we really need to be addressing.
I agree with you. Because I use those, I use the taxonomy with instructors, and I found and subject matter experts, and I found that it draws out this this kind of wish that they had about the kind of work that they wanted to do, how much impact their course would have, but they were just afraid to say, I want people to enjoy this after, right? It's beautiful. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. And I love the fact that your book works through that design process step by step. It's very comprehensive, well laid out. Now, I know that probably the best way for somebody to really start learning that is to actually get your book and work through that process. But if you could give people, let's say, 3 tips that they could, if they're looking to increase the quality of their course, and let's say it's already running, and you're like, okay, if you do nothing else, what would you do?
Yeah. 3 things. That's a nice question. I gave some thought to that, and here is my short list of 3. The first is, I think it would really be helpful for students, or for teachers, even before they start spelling out their learning goals, is to back up one step and say, what's your big dream? That was one of the changes I made from the first edition to the second dream. In the workshops, I discovered that one time. If you can pull up a single statement, what's your big dream for students when they finish this course? One sentence, one verb. What's the big thing, like an umbrella statement? What's the big thing you really want them to do? And get some focus on that. and then find a culminating project that is a way to assess that by the end of the course. Would pull that together, and then start saying, how do I get them from not being able to do that to being able to do that? But just to illustrate that, the moment that illustrated how valuable that was, I was doing a workshop at a school in North Carolina, and I was trying to get to that, and I asked this one teacher to see if she could be an example for us, and she was teaching a course on acting. And I said, what's the single big thing that you want students to, what's your big dream for this? And she really had a hard time answering. Well, there's so many things. They have to listen to the director. They have to interact with the set. They have to think about their audience. They have to have voice, know how to move around, and know what the director's trying to do with the play. All these things, she couldn't bring it down. I kept pressing her. One verb. I get no, one verb. And finally, she stepped back. It was a course on acting. And she said, by the end of the course, I want students to act well. We had it. Okay. Now, to do that, there's a whole bunch of things you got to learn, a whole bunch of skills, knowledge, and a whole bunch of things in there. But that was the big goal. Take a particular play, a particular role, or a scene within it or a component of it, and do it well. To do that, you're going to have to do all these other things. But that was a big dream. So I think if teachers can press themselves to find what is your big dream, but that's going to be exciting for you. And that's also going to help you drive you to say, how can I get that to happen for all the students? If not all of them, the large majority instead of 10%. Okay. Because that's your dream for that course and for those students. So that's going to be helpful for the students, for you, and everybody. So that's one thing. Really spend some time figuring out what your big dream is. And that's probably not going to be a 15-second exercise.
Now, I do have a question
Yeah.
Before we go on. Do you feel like that's something that, like, some teachers would be, are they embarrassed to say that that's their big dream? Or do they think it's like too lofty almost?
Well,
do they say it to their students, or is that something you kind of keep to yourself?
No, I recommend they put it in the syllabus.
Oh, that's fabulous.
The big goal of this course. Well, let me give you another example from my own teaching, and I put that in the syllabus. The last course that I taught at Oklahoma, well, actually, I'm not an engineer, but was in the College of Engineering, because they got a grant from NSF to prepare their graduate students for college teaching. But if you get a PhD in engineering, that's generally what you're doing. You're not going to work for industry, you're going into academia. And so they asked me to teach that. And so I knew that for those students, this was the only course they had that was going to do anything to prepare them for college teaching. So this was the whole bag, okay? So what was my big dream, okay? And I called the course not the essentials of college teaching. I called it preparing for college teaching, okay? And then following my own advice, I knew I couldn't teach them everything. So I said, I'm going to teach them the fundamentals. So that was part of it. But the other half was I want to make sure they're geared up to keep on learning after the course is over. So that learning how to learn, we spent a lot of time on that. But those were kind of two equal components of the course. But my big dream was I want them to finish this course ready for college, to start college teaching, which means they had the fundamentals down, but they also had a plan for getting better. Okay. So that was my dream. Well, I put that right in the syllabus. My goal, my big dream, I don't know whether I've used big dream or big goal, but my big goal is to prepare you to be an effective college teacher. So we're going to divide that into getting started and then later on. And then we went from there. So yeah, most time I haven't found people say that's worthless because it's too lofty, or if they get it, they like the dream once they get it. It's just getting to it that's the challenge for them. So that's one part. The other part, and I've mentioned this already, but I really found that maybe the single biggest thing that improved my college teaching was learning how to effectively use small groups. I think for active learning, there's a lot of things you can do, but I don't know of any other single thing that is as powerful as using small groups effectively, creating effective within intra-group dialogue, and then good intergroup dialogue across groups on when you get done with the intergroup, so forth. And the version of that I really like is a colleague of mine in the business college here. I discovered he developed it independently, but I discovered and was really impressed by it. It's called team-based learning. Of course, that's a strategy that I use in my workshop because I've come to believe in it. But when I compare that to a lecture, even when you're having a whole class discussion, in a whole class discussion, only one student is speaking at a time. You take a class of say 100 students in it, and you have one one student speaking, that means 99 are not. You break that up into 16 to 20 small groups, you've got 18 to 20 people who are talking, okay, at any given time. And so you just increase exponentially the engagement in the class. You give them the right there's a lot of things you got to do to make it work right, but those are, Larry did a good job of figuring out what those are and laying them out in his books and other people's books on it now. But if you can use small groups effectively, it just increases student engagement enormously, and I think the quality of student learning. So that'd be my second candidate. The third is that one I mentioned a while ago about having students periodically step back from the learning and reflect on learning to help them become self-conscious of themselves as a learner. Because one of my other conclusions, I guess I've come to is, as I mentioned when I got on my my soap opera here about learning how to learn, we really need for people to be effective self-directed learners. My belief is they cannot be effective self-directing learners unless they're highly self-aware of themselves as learners. And we're not doing a good job at all. The only way that's going to happen is if we periodically have them step back and start doing. I mean, the first time I had grad students, I said, I want you to write me a little essay, a self-reflection about yourself as a learner. Half the students had no idea. I mean, you want me to summarize my mind? No, that's not what I'm talking about. They didn't know because nobody had ever asked them to do it. And these are PhD students. Okay, that's a travesty. I mean, that's a tragedy. Okay, so we need to do that often within a class, but across classes. Is get them familiar, and then observations about themselves, and then drawing conclusions. And what does that tell me about myself? How do I learn well, kind of thing. And they need to leave college with a well-developed sense of how they learn well, so they can guide their own learning and expand the way they learn well. Not just take it as it is, but expand it if they can. So those are my three: big dreams, small groups, reflecting on yourself as a learner.
That's a tall order.
Well, you don't do that tomorrow morning.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I would. The big dream you could work on over the weekend. Small groups, you need some learning. Reflecting, that's not that hard, but there's some things you need to learn, and just getting the ideas and learning how to do them. The small group is probably has the most details in how to do that.
And experimenting and learning. I mean, unlearning, and also us unlearning a lot of habits that we have.
That's right. Yeah,
relearning them. Yeah. So okay. Yeah. So I am. I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours at least, which would be wonderful. But so I wanted to know if people wanted to learn more about your work, how to get in touch, how they could do a workshop, or opportunities for them to maybe learn more about how they're progressing when they continue applying your work. If you could tell us, that would be absolutely wonderful. And as long as you want to take for that, go for it, please.
Well, I get it in a few minutes here, I think. I got a few things to describe. First of all, if they want to contact me, and I'm certainly open to that, let me give you my email to the audience here. It's fairly simple. It's just the letters D-F-I-N-K, my first letter of my middle name, D, and then my last name, DFINK40@gmail.com. And I put that first time I came up, I had to create a Gmail address, and the Fink was already taken, so I had to put a number on there. And as soon as my accounting niece immediately said, now we know what year you were born in. And sure enough, 1940. Oh, she figured that out in a flash here. Okay. But it's dfink40@gmail.com. So I'm happy to get emails. I do get them every now and then with questions about this, that, or whatever. And I'm glad to get them. And I'm semi-retired. My wife says I didn't retire from Oklahoma. I just changed jobs. Some truth to that. So I'm busy, but I'm quite open to email. But what can they do to learn? There's three things I think they're really valuable. I'd like to bring to people's attention. The first is, as of about 2 years ago, I licensed someone else to offer an online course of my ideas on course design, on significant learning and integrated course design. And the website for that is one word, optimizelearning.org. Okay. And the lady named Linda Jacoba, she's the one who knew a lot about online courses and what you need to do to make those effective. what she did was I created an online course, but I didn't know anything about how to do it effectively. And she looked at it and, did one of these, almost like a teenager, rolled her eyes, like, my God, you got to change that.
It's a
And so I'm
science.
like,
It's
how?
a
And
science.
she listed all these things, and I realized immediately she knew what she was doing and I didn't, so I licensed her to teach it. So it's a 2-week course, taught with the content, but it's done in cohorts, so you're not taking it by yourself. And it's an active learning. It's not a read, test, read, test, read, test. It's a read, do, get feedback, go on, and dialogue with others, go on to the next step, read, do, share with others, get feedback from both other people, but also from Linda, or if she's got somebody else leading, a mentor who knows a lot about good course design. So when people come out, they know, and it takes about 20 hours over 2 weeks, and it costs $400. But it's really good. The people who have taken it, and there are a good number have taken it, they rave about this course really works, and it's a fun online course as opposed to a not fun online course, which a lot of those are. She started with my course. She actually got in part 1, part 2 now. But then since then, she's let me suggest other people and she's got like 3 or 4 other courses. One is on the team-based learning. One is on this Sandra McGuire about teaching students how to learn. The third one is on assessing student learning. And a book came out on learning assessment techniques, Elizabeth Barkley and Claire Major. And what they did was kind of like the old classroom assessment techniques book. They identified 50 different kind of assessment techniques. What they did, of course, that excited me was they took those 50 and categorized them in terms of which ones were especially effective for each of my 6 categories in the taxonomy of significant. So foundational knowledge, application, integration, learning how to learn. They got a total of 50 with, so probably 6 to 8 or 10 for each of those categories. So if you want to learn for an in-depth, they also have some things in that course just about assessing effectively and some good ideas. So optimizelearning.org, I think, is a real good place to go. And if your institution wants to do a bunch of people, she'd give institutional discounts on that. The second thing is, some years ago, I created a website, and the URL for that is designlearning, one word, designlearning.org. And what I've done is use that as a place to archive lots of different things about course design. So the ideas, but also a lot of the handouts like this focused learning, that questionnaire is on there, things like that, and a whole bunch of things that I found are useful. But the other thing I draw attention to is one place on there, we have one of those tabs for examples of good course design. And people have periodically sent me some, here's my draft of the course design after I took your workshop or read your book or whatever, and I would dress it up a little bit. But once it was done, it's really good. I said, we need to be able to share that with people. So we create a place on this website that has now we have just a little over 24 examples. So I've grouped them by natural science, social science, humanities, and so forth. But the other thing to make it easy for people, I've also put on that same tab a template for what information we need for it to qualify. So what you do is just download that template, just a Word document, fill in the pieces, some of just what's the setting, what's your situational factors, what are you doing about them, what are your primary learning, what's your big dream and your primary learning goals, what's your 3-column table, what's your teaching strategy, and then if they've taught it with that course design, what evidence do you have about the impact on student engagement, student learning? So it's a little further than just a course design itself. But so what they do is they fill out the template, they email it to me, I look it over, give them feedback where I think it needs to be modified a little bit this way or that way, send it back to them, and either 1 or 2 bounces, and they usually get it pretty good, and then we post it on the website. Well, when they post it, it's an example of the scholarship of teaching and learning because it's a peer-reviewed by me posting, and that thing gets a lot of visits because people want to see examples of those those good course designs, so people visit. The last thing is also really exciting. There's a new book coming out within a few months. Stuart Ross, the guy who directed that workshop you were in, and another guy who's worked this for some time, have put together a book that's more or less together. I just wrote the foreword for it, but when I said it'll be out probably in March of next year, 2019. It is called Designing Effective Teaching and Significant Learning. Okay, 2 authors, Zela Frashant and Stuart Ross. The publisher is Stylus Press, and so I'm really excited. What they've basically done is review a little bit the ideas, but they've listened to people who either attended the workshop, read the book, tried to do it, and where were they challenged? Where did they stub their toes? Where did they say, well, I thought I understood how to write a set of learning goals, but when I tried to do it, it just didn't flow out right. What are some things you can help me with? Well, they've got chapters on all those different problems that people frequently say we have problems with. So I think it will really be effective. How do you do this, in fact? My book laid out the ideas and a little bit of start of that. This is a follow-up book to that that says, goes a lot further into the how-to and helps people with the problems they're likely to have. So those are the three sources: the optimized learning for an online course. My site, for example, is a good design, and plus a lot of handouts and other ideas. And then this new book that'll be coming out sometime early, mid part of next year.
And of course, your book too, still creating.
And my book is of course available. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah. And one of the things I have learned that I'll maybe go ahead and mention here, a lot of the times, I don't know what percentage, don't have that information, but I often get reports from people that said, I'm teaching a course for graduate students or teaching assistants on college teaching, and we're using my book as one of the primary texts for that, which of course delights me. I think one of the reasons is that they figured out this, of the things you can learn, this is one of the fundamental things. But the other thing about it, the way it's set up, it also shows you the other thing that links to that, like active learning, educative assessment, different teaching strategies, et cetera, all those different kind of things, assessment activities, learning activities. It shows you how these other things relate to the course design and what else you probably want to spend some more time learning about, just to continue ratcheting yourself up as a good course designer and a good teacher. So yeah, that's being used on cases when they want to get people started on the process of learning about teaching. Good course design turns out, I think, to be a good place to start.
I agree.
And maybe I'll use that as a good time to finish this conversation.
You've done this before. Oh, that's fabulous. And I'm so pleased that you are following up with another book, because you're right. There are obvious, and also it just shows that there is an evolution, and you're listening to us, the learners.
Imagine that. Yay.
I know, it's awesome. It's fabulous. I look forward to, to me, the workshops are great to attend after you've had a chance to read the book, to actually attend the workshop, because everybody comes in with their own experiences, and you can really leverage that to take your learning to. So are there any upcoming workshops that you're putting on, or?
Well, there are. Let's see, this is October. I'm heading off that one in Kenya, but the ones here in the States, I'm going to New York University in mid-October, and then the week after that to Boston College. And so those are my two. And then I'm going to, I don't know if people know about the Lilly Conference. It's a conference not about faculty development, about teaching, in Miami University in Ohio, down the southwestern corner of Ohio. Been going for many years, a really high quality conference. But I'm doing a short half-day workshop there on the course design. So those are the three for this fall. Yeah.
Okay.
That's in early November.
I will find everything that we've talked about today. The links will be underneath the video. So if you're interested in checking those out, everybody, just click there. And I have visited your site, and the resources are fantastic. But now I'm going to check out Optimized Learning, because I didn't know that was there.
It's got some good things on it. Yeah.
Awesome. Really, thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. The dog didn't bark.
Yes, and my phone didn't ring, so we're both good shape here. Well, I also want to thank you very much, both for creating this this way of communicating with so many people. I think I'm sure it must be helping them in lots of different ways. But thank you for inviting me to be a part of that.
Not a problem. My pleasure. Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much. I will follow up when it's live so that you can share.
Okay, thank you again. Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of the day. Bye.
You're listening to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Zabramowitz.